join us. According to the program that has been presented, we shall have, before we move on to the objective, we have a video that is going to tell us a little bit about the story of the young girl and make a number of proposals, because let us not forget that yesterday was the International Girls' Day, and as parliamentarians and representatives of the people, we cannot not mark that day, even if we do it a day later. So we have a video that we're going to watch together, and there may be comments, and they will be very welcome. And so our program is going to start now. And we have the first module, objective of Module 1, which is entitled Strengthen the Knowledge of Members of the Pan-African Parliament Women's Caucus on International and Regional Human Rights Instruments to Support Domestication at the National Level. Now, in this module, we shall have a presentation, or rather, we shall have two presentations. The first one will be a presentation overview on international and regional instruments on human rights, especially women's rights and their domestication, followed by discussion, and then a second theme, peace and security platform of the G5 Sahel countries, which shall be presented to us by, and I do apologize if I don't pronounce your names correctly, but by Madam Hadas Walde Georgis, and then you get Bokpe Gna Kaja, and then Jacqueline Nzoyehera. And then on Peace and Security Platform, it will be Mr. Usman Jibril, representative of the G5 Sahel platform. That presentation will be followed by discussion. The second module, enhance awareness on female genital mutilation and the Sustainable Development Goals that we know as SDGs. So we have a presentation on FGM and SDGs, followed by discussion. It will be presented by Ms. Senabu Tal, Regional Gender and GBV Advisor in the UNFPA. Our moderator will be Honorable Bangirana Anifa Kawoya, and this will be followed by a second presentation, anti-medicalization of FGM as a violation of international and regional human rights instruments. And it shall be followed by discussion, as usual. And Ms. Senabu Tal shall continue to make that presentation. And then we shall move to Module 3, follow-up on the achievements of the Pan-African Parliament Women's Caucus on the 2016 Conference Action Plan for the Elimination of Female Genital Mutilation. Now, as far as that presentation is concerned, we shall have the possibility of discussing with all of the parliamentarians who are attending this caucus, those who attended last week's conference, and those who are in the follow-up committee of the Women's Caucus meeting. And we shall try and see what progress has been made since 2016 to today, beginning on the basis of the plan of action that was agreed on last year. Let me remind us a little bit about what the objectives of that plan of action was. We needed to undertake advocacy within our own countries and try and see what progress there was in terms of legislation. And there was also the issue of mobilization of the community and also mobilization of resources. And we're going to try and discuss all of those issues and discuss and see what progress we have made in our respective countries. And then module number 4, understanding the role of men and boys in the elimination of FGM. Before we get to that module, we shall have a recap of day 1, which shall be presented by Madam Sangondo, and then we shall have then we shall begin to discuss this module 4 with two presentations. First of all, why engage men and boys? And the second presentation, gender norms transformation, followed by discussion, which will be led by Ms. Itumeleng Komanyan, and then Honorable Gloriosa Nimenyaye will be the deputy chairperson of the PAP Women's Caucus, and in that module, of course, we shall have a coffee break as well. Then we have objective number 5, which is entitled as Understanding the Linkage Between Demographic Dividend, Gender Equality, and Ending FGM. There will be a presentation linking demographic dividend, gender equality, and ending FGM. And there will be a presenter, Mr. Richmond Tiemoko, Regional Advisor, Population Dynamics, UNFPA, SRO. And this will be facilitated by Honorable Gloriose, and then we shall move to the closing ceremony, the official closing ceremony for our conference. And there will be, first of all, the presentation of conclusions, recommendations, and way forward, and that will be done by Dr. Lita Musiemi Ogana. Then there will be a vote of thanks, which shall be presented by Honorable Swilma Haye Mohamed El Qaid, the third Vice President of the Pan-African Parliament. And finally, the official closing of our conference, which shall, and there will be 2 speakers. There will be Ms. Justine Coulson, Deputy Regional Director, UNFPA, SRO, and then there will also be the Honorable Dr. Bernadette Lahai, our 4th Vice President of the Pan-African Parliament, who will close the ceremony. And the moderation will be done by Honorable Aminata Nyang. And so I would like also to make an announcement, 2 announcements rather. You will have with you during each, for each module, a document will be distributed. It will be in 3 languages, and you can put your name, you can put the name of your country, and present it to the Secretariat so that you can be given the floor. So you will have a piece of paper like this, and you can ask the ushers on either side of the room to take your document, take it to the Secretariat, so that you can be given the floor to ask any questions or make any comments that you may wish to make. Now, the final announcement I'd like to make is that there is media in the room covering this conference directly. So if you wish, if the personalities want to be interviewed, would like to invite you, because we do have the media, and they'll be more than happy to organize some interviews if you wish to be interviewed. I'd like to thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much. Asante sana, shukran, obrigado, and gracias as well.
Merci beaucoup, Safia.
Thank you very much, Safia. As you normally do, the presentation was excellent. Thank you very much. So what I'd like to happen now is that we follow the agenda as presented. In other words, we would listen to the different presentations, and then we would open the floor for discussion. And so so we're going to watch the video, first of all, on the International Day of the Girl Child. Let's watch the video, and then we shall move on to the next presentation.
Truly became a woman.
Are you going to defer to one of us, or was you just going to...
It's going to sound terribly stereotypical, but I think it's when I started cooking. Like, I love cooking.
I became a woman when I got my first cell phone.
It was when I started living on my own.
When I got my first paycheck.
When I had responsibilities.
I became a woman when I could speak my mind. When I took the train by myself. I became a woman when I conquered my biggest fear.
Isn't it the day you get your period?
When I said I do.
When I graduated from university.
I I became a woman when I became a mother.
This is my whole life. This little one over here. When I learned to stand up for myself.
When I realized I'm enough just as I am.
The day I became a woman was the day they cut me.
Then we told us today we're going to be circumcised.
Ils m'ont attaché à un arbre et je ne pouvais pas courir.
I cried, but nobody was there in the forest. For 2 weeks, they kept my legs tied together.
By cutting me, they were telling me I'm not good enough.
Merci beaucoup.
Everybody's really committed and trying to do something, but it has to be more coordinated perhaps, and perhaps encourage dialogue and communication between and amongst communities. And I think this is one of the good things about this forum, in that the parliamentarians, who are the link, a strong link between policy and communities, are in this room.
One of the things is to ensure that we have laws in place that can deal with the harmful practices, and if the laws are in place and they are not being implemented, it is also good as a parliamentarian to sit down and analyze why those laws are not implemented and where is the deadlock.
The language is very important. The sort of terminologies that we use. We also look at who are the forefront of fighting these issues.
We explored activities and examples in different countries, particularly African countries, and we also got information from our partners in other countries like Finland, England, etc., who are presently getting an influx of refugees from developing countries who incidentally are transporting these practices into those countries.
The role of parliamentarians from countries across the world is to take a lead both in ensuring that the laws are sufficiently robust and are implemented, but also to understand the different cultures, backgrounds, and to be recognizing where achievements have been made.
It is very important to come up with an intervention to ensure that these harmful practices which are taking place in many countries are actually going to an end. As a member of parliament, I believe you have got a very important role.
This is really a violation of young girls and is completely unacceptable in our society.
Le rôle des parlementaires est essentiel dans la lutte contre les mutilations sexuelles, génitales, féminines et toutes les discriminations contre les femmes. Parce que le député, le parlementaire, c'est celui qui vote les lois, c'est celui qui doit contrôler l'action du gouvernement.
Thank you very much. We do apologize to the French speaking delegates because the video was mainly in English, and fortunately it was not possible to do simultaneous interpretation as we normally do. This is a video that was shot in Morocco during a conference that took place on FGM, female genital mutilation, in collaboration with the European Union and with the contribution of our Vice President, Madame Lahai, that we are able to have this video, because she fights always for women's rights and women's progress. So we're now going to move to the first module, which is going to be presented by Ms. Hadas Worlde George's overview on international and regional instruments on human rights, especially women's rights and their domestication. So I'd like to invite Ms. Hadas Worlde George's. Sorry if I'm not pronouncing the name correctly. I'd like to invite her to come forward. She is an expert in social development and gender. Is she in the room? Thank you.
Your Excellencies, Pan-African Parliament members, distinguished guests, and I would like to thank the organizers of this 10th annual conference on women's rights. And I think this should be a day for celebrating our achievements and successes. When we look back of how far we have come from the 80s, 90s, 20s, and the 21st century, we have come a long way, and African women has achieved a lot, and we have to applaud it. Because we have put in place a lot of instruments, but we have also been increasing our representation. So, but still, we have also to step back and put concrete commitments and actions to move the women and youth agenda forward. On my presentation, I always look at women and youth agenda as the same agenda, because 50% or more in some countries of young people are women, and they are the most vulnerable groups in every country. So, in underlining the critical issues that affect both groups, in our African setting, it's employment, access to resource, peace and security, and their comprehensive human development progress that have been made so far. So, looking at the different instruments, we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was in 1948. But if we ask ourselves, where was Africa during that time? Most of African countries were struggling to get their independence. So it's like, you know, we didn't even have the platform to put our agenda forward. But the struggle has come up with a lot of results where we have reached to put a Pan-African Parliament, where we have put a strong institutions in place. And looking at the next one, which was relevant, was the Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women in 1979, which have set up a clear agenda on where are the key issues that when we are talking of empowering women and youth. And also following on it, we have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which was the Nairobi one in 1981. So Africa, from the Universal Declaration, has put its own agenda on people's rights. And at the same decade, we have the Nairobi Forward-Looking Strategy on Women in 1985, which was also convened in Nairobi. And following it, we have also very critical but also focused interventions on the ICDP, which looks at sexual and reproductive rights and health of women in 1994, the Beijing Conference in 1995, but I'm not ruling out the various sustainable development conferences and others that were also going on and which were very critical. And finally, we have reached to a stage where we have the protocol to the African Chamber on Human and People's Rights and the Rights of Women in Africa in 2003, which was the Maputo Protocol, and it was a breaking point for African women to move forward with a clear agenda. And I have always used it as a very comprehensive but also focused package that we have to pick up. And following it, we also have a very successful intervention. African Union put the Gender Directorate. We have the Youth Unit, and in each country, I think, I don't have the facts, but I feel that every African country today has a gender ministry, not a directorate or a ministry who sits on a cabinet. And this is an area where we have to work on, if we have to look at, where do we address women's issue integrated in the overall social development issues. And what are some of the moves that we have done when it comes to domestication of the Maputo Protocol? So far, 36 countries have ratified it and 15 has signed. And we have over 50 member countries. So this is an issue where parliamentarians might have to look at, but also work with strong institutions to put the agenda forward. And in terms of those who have rectified, there is a need to align it with their local policies and constitutions. And we have to look at, how far have some countries gone, but there is also a need for having a clear monitoring instrument, strong one, which forces countries to make sure that they are aligned with their constitution, with their commitments. And in some areas we have even reached the international level. For example, when it comes to Rwanda, I am expecting that soon it will be over the other Scandinavian countries when it comes to representation at parliament level. And Ethiopia is also coming up as an example for youth employment. So there are upcoming facts that, where Africa is really going in the right direction. But we still need a strong monitoring and system in place, but also with clear recognition of those who have achieved, but also reporting on where countries have to do much more. And we don't have clear data on that. So, because it's encouraging that we know who is doing well so that others can also enjoy and follow them. But we need also to have a much stronger capacity in place for addressing the youth and gender agendas. Sufficient human resource, technology, in terms of financial capacity. Because I have been working on gender for the last how many years? Over 25 years of my life, since I started working with Pan-African Institute for Development, which was supposed to training African leaders to be administrators and managers of their own countries, and also working for over 15 years with the World Bank. There is always a lip service to gender and youth issues. But if you don't put the money, if you don't have the qualified personnel in place, the agenda is not going to move anywhere. So these are the areas where we have to look at. We have plenty of protocols, we have declarations, we have policies at national level. So putting the right resources that push the agenda forward will be very important. And for putting the women and youth agendas in place, we need also more platforms at regional level, at continental level, regional level, and local levels or national levels. And this has to be a much more strong instruments in terms of policy, but also in terms of action. That's when we can connect the ratified commitment of the protocol with the achievements. And women in Africa needs to do a much more stronger network and advocacy still, because we have a long way to go. But advanced policies to ensure economic empowerment of women and youth is very critical. We have seen that people who are economically empowered can sit in parliament, can go to better schools, they can do better for making sure that their families and their community is being taken care of. So I believe in economic empowerment, which is fundamental to their rights as well as to their protection. We have also to adapt the use of technology. I feel a bit sad when I look at most of our young people focusing on these social networks, Facebook. I always fight with my children, with my nieces. I said there are a lot of more important issues for you than spending more time on Facebook. Google on what is going on in Africa, what's going on in our country. We don't need to get data from somebody else. So this is an area, we have the technologies upcoming, but are we using it at full scale? And are we using it for the right message is an issue, but IT will be the future, and we have to really work on it, on how to make sure that our young people use the right technology for the right issue. And building on what we have achieved so far, there is one thing which is a point of concern. If we have looked at the World Development Report of 2017, which was on education, in most countries, including African countries, there is indication of the decline in the quality of the education system. So if our children are not educated properly, and there is increased globalization, which we cannot stop. So this is an area where we have women and youth issues need to consider. And I think the report is out, but we can also look at the local reports on education. I personally believe education is very, very critical. I was raised by a mother who has never gone to school. She got married when she was 11 and started having babies at the age of 17. We are 8 in the family, but she was responsible for almost like 30 children, raising 30 children. And she died when she was young at 66 because of breast cancer. And this was what moved me from my previous career as a management to move to social development. So I think African women need to take it into heart that, social development is our issue, but we have also to make sure all the father, the community, everybody takes up the issue. And with the Maputo Proclamation of 2009, use peace and security, I think it's important that the Solomon Declaration of Equality, these are very critical instruments, but we have to take note also of some re-emerging issues, but also continuous issues. It seems that we have dropped the issue of HIV/AIDS, and now slowly countries are reporting that HIV/AIDS is re-emerging in every African countries. And this is not just only a health issue, this is not a social issue, but it's a comprehensive economic and development issue. So we have dropped the ball, and I think it's important that our parliamentarians take up the issue and look at it more seriously, because I was working in Zambia in the 90s. I was very young, but I saw our drivers dying, our trained people dying, technicians who were at senior level at government, and I saw, the impact with very sad story. So this is an issue where we have to look at re-emerging issue, but the falling quality of education will be very critical. But linking education and employment is also very critical. And we have to spend more resource, time, and data supported, but also facts-based, based on local issues when we are looking at youth employment. And the other thing that we have to consider is also the political representation. It has to be inclusive, it has to be transparent, and it has to be socially responsible. And I'm so glad that we know at PAP we have strong women representation, but I have seen also in Ethiopia, I came back from the World Bank after working for 15 years back home, and now I don't miss sessions of parliament going on in Ethiopia, because I am seeing very strong women who are taking up issues on corruption, issues on mismanagement of resources, issues on which are critical to social development, and I'm so happy about it. But we need to put resources at Pan-African level, because this is a strong institution which can force countries to make sure that they put resources in place and support the capacity of those women who are really considering the important issues for sustainable development, but also for the whole continent. And we also need a much more stronger bodies for integration and cross-sectoral issues, because in some cases, even we have strong institutions at continental level, at regional level, as well as at even the national levels. We are not integrating them properly to use the resources, but also to address issues in a very comprehensive manner. So this is an issue. We have the protocol, we have the policies coming out of it, but the actions are the ones which will determine if we have achieved or not. And for the action, we really need to put strong institutions with the necessary resources. And mentoring and succession plans are also very critical at all levels, at the continental level, regional level, and national level. So I think some countries are coming up, including their young people as parliamentarians, which is the right decision forward. So in most countries now we are striving to have a 50-50 to make sure that we implement the Solomon Declaration. But still, this is the right direction forward, but we have to empower them so that they can know the macroeconomic analysis. Instead of getting from big institutions, we really need to have the people in place. And sometimes people complain, these big institutions, but at continental level, we need to be represented at every strong institution. And to do that, we need to have the right people with the right skills and the passion and commitment for the continent. So this is very important. And we also have to work on empowering African institutions to produce evidence-based reports and data facts, you know. What is going on behind our back door? what is going on in our countries rather than waiting to get it from other institutions. And we do have the skills now, we do have the capacities, and it will be our own report and our own data. We also know what are the implications and the effects as we move forward. And I think we have, my conclusion is we have come a long way. When the Human Rights Declaration Universal was declared in 1948, we were fighting with colonizers. But in 2017, we have a Pan-African Parliament with proper representation of women, and hopefully we are also working to have more young people at this Parliament. Because if we don't mentor them at young age, they will not have the necessary skills, and they will not even have the understanding of what are the issues, because we have to have a legacy of living behind a succession where we can continue on the right direction. And this meeting focuses on peace and security. And I think we have been looking at the underlying issues of peace and security. It's economic security, it's representation and voice, it's also having strong institutions which are very independent and which can say no to injustice and other facts. So I think we have come a long way. The 10th annual conference should be a day for celebration of the achievements that we have come forward, but we have also to look at critically how far we have come up and what should be our way forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oui, elle n'avait pas été. Quelqu'un peut nous voir.
Thank you very much, Madam Georges, for your presentation. That enlightened us on a lot of aspects. It was mention was made of the Maputo Protocol. The Maputo Protocol is in favor of women, and this was ratified by most of the states, but it's its application. When you talk about domestication, I believe that it's application that's posing a problem, and as members of parliament, we need to play a role in that area. She talked about youth. Youth is the future of our countries. In order for the youth to be able to reach a certain level, it is important for them to play their part, and we have a lot of youth parliamentarians. She also raised the example of Rwanda and Ethiopia. It is true that Rwanda has always been an example for us, especially in a certain number of domains, in particular women. Ethiopia has also made considerable progress, and it's up to us as women to push so that our countries, because we are all nationals of African countries, for our countries to be able to set a good example. But when you have good examples, it's good to follow that. She also talked about political representation of women. I think that everyone is aware. In fact, a lot of countries have enacted laws to address this issue, and there are laws that are in the process of being enacted, and civil society and parliamentarians have a role to play, because civil society is one of the pillars that helps us to move forward. I don't have the list of speakers, but we're going to go on to the next presentation. I think we'll go through all the presentations and we'll have the list of speakers. Now, I'd like to call upon Madame Jacqueline Nzoyi-Hera. She's a Regional Human Rights Officer in the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. I'd like to invite her forward for her presentation.
Tu m'avais dit que c'était fini, non? Non, j'ai un document sur lequel Huguette est barré. Donc, je pensais qu'elle n'était pas là. Je m'excuse.
I must apologize. It's actually Advocate Huguette who is a lawyer and expert in human rights and gender. On my list, her name was excluded.
Okay, donc Madame Huguette, vous...
Madame Huguette, you have the floor. I apologize. The document implied that you were not in attendance. Thank you. I would like to take this opportunity to thank sincerely the Pan-African Parliament, and in particular this conference, for the opportunity provided to me to share some information on the issue of the conventions and instruments, the international and regional instruments on human rights relating to women's rights. I would also like to apologize to my Francophone sisters because most of my material is in English. So I'm going to give the presentation in English, but don't worry because we do have the interpreters and they've done a good job.
I think that the international and regional instruments related to women's human rights are many, but we are going to focus on 4 main instruments. The first is the Convention on Elimination of All Discrimination Against Women, called in French CEDEF, CEDAW in English. Also at the international level, the Convention on the Right of the Child, and at the regional level, the Maputo Protocol and the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child. The time will not really allow me to go in depth of those conventions, and I think that when you put together the Convention on Elimination of All Discrimination Against Women, you put it together with the Maputo Protocol, you will see that the purpose is quite the same. The definition of discrimination against women is given, and there's a key article, Article 2, on both sides, which gives guidelines for the legislative, political, social, and institutional measures that all state parties are to take so as to ensure effective implementation at the national level. Then you have a range of rights that are covered by the convention. And the special thing about the Maputo Protocol is that the Maputo Protocol went far and took care of a range of traditional, religious, harmful practices that are specific to Africa. And I can name, this one is not specific to Africa, but do really exist a lot in Africa. Female genital mutilation, early marriage, early and forced marriage, annulments of marriages, widow practices, levirate. All those practices have been prohibited by the Maputo Protocol. I think it is really something to commend. And the most difficult was to talk about polygamy. And I think that a word was used with cautious. It was very cautious. It is said that the convention, the protocol said state parties are encouraged. It's not stated as a prohibition. It is stated as an exhortation. But is it up to each country now to decide how it will be implemented at the national level? And I want to give the example of Benin. In Benin, we have put it very clearly on the family code that monogamy is the unique way
of getting married. You may not agree with us. It has been a long fight because at the beginning the Constitutional Court said it couldn't be so. Then women, the movement of women said, well, if you want to use the principle of equality, then you should allow also women to have several husbands. Then the case was settled. Monogamy was now accepted as the legal way of getting married. I think the convention has been ratified by, I think today it is 193 countries. And some of the countries which did not ratify are, for example, the United States of America. So we don't have any problem with ratifying, but we have a problem with domestication and implementation. The domestication is two ways. In some countries, it can be directly applied in the national legislation. In some other countries like Benin, it is said that duly ratification has been defined by the Constitutional Court as the convention that has been ratified and published in the official journal. But there's a problem that I have never been able to understand. It is how long it takes to our government just to publish in the official journal the instruments that are ratified. I have a case at court where I could not use the African Charter on the rights and welfare of the child because the Constitutional Court said once it has not been published, well, I cannot use it. But the Constitutional Court did not even ask for the publishment of this convention. And civil society is the only one who has a concern about it and keeps on asking to do it, and the government keeps on delaying it. While for other range of agreements, it is very quickly published in the official journal. I think that the parliamentarians, they have a key role to play in reminding the government of its obligations. It's so simple to publish, because once it is published, it can be directly referred to in a proceedings. But as long as it is not, then we have ratified, but we cannot use it. In some other countries, you cannot directly apply it, but you have to translate it into a national law before using it. So I think that the role of the parliament is also to periodically inquire about how the convention is implemented at the national level. Another thing is when a convention is translated into a law. Let me give an example. I give the example of my country because that's the one I know the best. In Benin, we have a law that prevents against gender-based violence. And the law stated that we should set up one-stop care centers to take care of victims. Well, then we need a decree, because such a measure requires a decree from the president that will create and organize and give attributions to that one-stop care centers. So in such cases, so long as, that's another thing that is really delayed in our country, you promulgate a law and it can take sometimes 10 years to have one decree that will set up an institution or a structure that has been provided by this law. So sometimes it doesn't take money, it doesn't take help from anyone, it just takes political will and, how can I say it? putting first things first. Because so long as our government, our state, and when I say state, I include the parliament in the state, so long as we will not see women's and girls' rights as not only as human rights issues, but as a strategy for development, we will not put it in our priorities. Sometimes it is so ridiculous to see how much of money is allocated in the budget for the implementation of the conventions. If we do not allocate adequate resources, where are we going? My concern is about those little issues, because these are the things that are impeding us from moving forward. Political will, political will. Political will. Political will is the one that will make it a priority, that will make the state to remember that it is a commitment and I have to abide to it. I want to move to recommendations, because I think it's more important than talking to you about the content of the conventions. What could we do to move forward? The first thing, to me, that I put it first when I came, is the dissemination of the work that is done by the Permanent Commission of the Pan-African Parliament. You are doing a tremendous work. This commission is doing a tremendous work, but it requires a large dissemination. So we know that our parliaments are concerned and are really doing a work that can be used as tools to work and plead the cases before our local parliaments. I talk about political will. One thing is also to appropriate the content of the conventions, because in my experience I have also noticed that sometimes, though the parliament, the National Assembly, is the one who ratified, they still don't really know, in fact, the depth of the commitment that are taken. So I humbly suggest that you get even closer to the content of the convention so that you can know how to, you can inquire the government on very specific things. And when it comes to the conventions of elimination of all discrimination against women, there's one thing that I would like to highlight. It is the general recommendations of the Committee on Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. Let's say it is part of the content of the convention, but the advantage of appropriating those general recommendations is that it gives more details about some of the issues that are key. I give an example: temporary special measures. Temporary special measures, when not well understood, are considered as violating the principle of equality between men and women. And this is what is happening in my country. There is a specific general recommendation of the committee that really explains what a temporary special measure is. When it is understood, the country can really move forward. But in my country, on the contrary, it was said that it gives preference to a gender, so it is non-constitutional. While the real purpose of temporary special measures is to fill a gap and to get as close as possible to the equality between men and women. And it is temporary, which means that when the gap is filled, then it is, for example, the role of the parliament to say, well, the gap is filled now, removal of the temporary special measures. This is how it works. But if it is not well understood, it's not used as a powerful tool. some issues are also very important. For example, we are fighting against female genital mutilations. And I want to suggest the Parliament to make sure that the registration of children at birth is, that it is done at all levels in the country. If you don't register the children at birth, there are certain things that you cannot control. You cannot have real data. FGM, we have a lot of global data. When we come to national data, it is extremely difficult. And it is more and more difficult. Why? Because now people, they act on babies. It happens more and more literally at birth. How many children are registered at birth? So you can't follow up. You can't know. It happens. It is registered nowhere because it can't be traced. Only the registration at birth can help, have a kind of survey to see what is the proportion of girls that are subject to female genital mutilation. It also crosses borders. It can happen within a day. A family can cross the border of Benin through the north, get to Niger, do the thing, and in the evening of the following day, quietly come back to Benin. Nobody knows. It's even migrating from internal regions to town. We have discovered 2 cases of female genital mutilation at the capital. Can you imagine? Because they know that if you say it, nobody will believe you. It can't happen in town. No, it's not possible. But it happens. So it is very important to take measures and to exhort the executive to take appropriate measures to tackle the new face of female genital mutilation. Early and forced marriage. How many times I have not found myself in a case of early marriage where right from the police office, somebody will come and say, well, this guy is, his brother is a politician, very influential. So please, let's find an amicable settlement. Amicable settlement has become one of the most strongest things that we are fighting. And the most shocking thing is that some of the amicable settlements derive from pressure from, high ranked people. These are things that the Parliament should not be quiet about. The last figure that we have concerning early pregnancies in Benin, that was for the academic year 2016 to 2017. Schooled girls, out of 301,000 something, 2,080 something girls are pregnant. How do you, and everybody is running after the issue, everybody is looking after solutions. I believe that the Parliament should get the first to be concerned about the issue. How can it be possible that with all the laws and conventions that we have ratified, so many girls are getting impregnated in school and mostly from teachers? So I'm talking about practical things so that the Parliament gets involved in those practical things at a ground level, even more than, it's about ground level issue to tackle. Then we can have the hope that in the future, in 5 years, we can really assess a better implementation of those conventions. And I remember when I was still, I've been an expert of the CEDAW committee, and the role of Parliament was so important to the committee that we have decided to elaborate, to formulate a paragraph, a standard paragraph, in the concluding observations that the committee makes whenever a state party submits its report. And this paragraph is in the concluding observation. Up to now, it has been formulated, and the Parliament is called to be part of the implementation of the conventions at a national level. I think I will stop there. Maybe when we start the debate, other questions can arise, and I will try to respond. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Microphone, please.
Merci.
Thank you, ma'am, for this very interesting and instructive presentation for us. Well, in summary, the Maputo Protocol comes up time and again in our discussions. We know that this protocol is extremely important for us, and she spoke about the role to be played by parliamentarians in this process, and what she said towards the end of her presentation by saying that we have not taken ownership of the Maputo Protocol, because in order to defend something, you need to know its content. And so that is a challenge for us in order to know exactly what is part of the Maputo Protocol, in order to call the attention of our governments, our policymakers. As we always say, we do have a possibility of having oversight over governmental action, but at the same time, we can lobby as parliamentarians. So this is a challenge for all of us. There's something that she said which drew my attention and which is a recurrent issue, and that is young girls who get pregnant in schools, and most often the teachers are the culprits. I think we need to find strategies to punish those who are responsible for this, so that we put an end to this, because this is a problem we face in all our countries in Africa. This is not acceptable, that a teacher impregnates his pupil, his student. That's just not acceptable. Well, we've also noted that, talking about the Maputo Protocol, we have 193 countries that have ratified this protocol, and that's not a small number, but we're talking about enforcement, which is a problem. And for this enforcement, we have to get involved, so that when our leaders take decisions, they also implement them. And if they don't that, we should make sure that we can force them to enforce the convention, particularly vis-a-vis the young girl child. She also spoke about birth registration, so that we can have more reliable data. I fully agree with her, because most of the time, now, of late, people don't wait for the young girls to be 3, 5, or 10 years old. They're doing it at the maternity, right when they are born. We are running late. So what I'd like to propose, because we have about 20 requests for the floor, so what I propose is that we continue with the program as mentioned, and we will now call on Mrs. Jacqueline. I think it's her turn now. Well, we wanted to invert the order. It's Jacqueline, but it's since Mr. Usman Jibril has just come, and he's been traveling since yesterday evening. So I was suggesting that he should speak first, so that
C'est toi qui m'as envoyé, hein? Tu m'as dit qu'il faut que tu la passes. OK. Donc, on va faire passer Jacqueline.
Okay, we will listen to Jacqueline. Let's follow the order on the agenda. We'll listen to Jibrila will follow, and then we'll go for lunch, and we will resume in the afternoon after lunch with the discussions. Thank you, Jacqueline. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you, Honorable Aidara Aishata Sise and Honorable Safia Elmi Jibril. Merci. Honorable members of Parliament and honorable guests, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed, I'm honored to be invited today to the 10th Annual Conference on Women and speak about something that I have very close to my heart, which is human rights, women's rights, international human rights laws and mechanisms, and their domestication. I have to admit that I am kind of intimidated by the two previous speakers who were very, how can I say, they really unpacked some of the issues. So therefore, I will briefly, in a certain way, give you an overview of international human rights mechanisms and the tools available to you all. I'm sure that you are aware of human rights milestone in international fields. It all started, as you all know, with the ashes, out of the ashes of the World War II. But interestingly, when we look at the United Nations Charter, where the two words human rights started and were put black and white, the Charter, when you look at the preamble, it was inspired by our own African values of respect, humanity, Ubuntu, dignity, equality, and social protection. So our values are still in the United Nations Charter. And from the United Nations Charter, which were two words, they decided at the General Assembly at the time to come up with a document which would unpack what human rights were. And that's where it gave birth to what we call the Universal Declaration for Human Rights, which came with 31 articles. So from two words, we had 31 articles. And then from there, we just had a declaration where everybody endorsed it and accepted it. And that was not enough, because we all know what was happening at the time. Discrimination was a norm, colonization was the norm, and let's not even try to speak about women's rights around that time. 1948, even Eleanor Roosevelt couldn't exercise the right to vote in some states in her country in 1948, and she was the president of the commission which drafted the Universal Declaration for Human Rights. So it's kind of amazing that we started with two words, 31 articles, and still a lot of things needed to be done, and discrimination, colonization, and others. So the members of the General Assembly at the time agreed to, okay, we have a declaration, what does it entail, who is responsible, whose obligation, how can we implement, how can we promote? And that's how they delegated another group of individuals to come together and draft a covenant on civil and political rights and economic, social, and cultural rights. Now, remember, we started 1945, and then we went to 1948, and the two covenants came to birth in the 1960s, 19 years later. And why is that? Because there were blocks and states could not agree on which right was the most important. Was it civil and political rights? Was it economic, social, and cultural rights? Which one should come first? So there was a whole debate around that. And from those two, of course, came CEDAW, which was mentioned, came out in 1979, 10 years after. And then a whole lot of other conventions came to birth. It is kind of interesting because with the treaty bodies, these conventions, it was still not enough. violation was still going on around the world, and there was no way of holding accountable the states, the individual, or whoever was doing it. And if it was not the turn of the state to submit a report to the treaty bodies, well, tough for that nation and tough for those people. That's how then the Human Rights Commission decided to set up what they call special procedures. The special procedures are individuals who would come to, who will visit countries. This time you will not need to go to New York or to Geneva. You had this time an individual who will come to you, visit your country, and see what's the human rights status in your country, and see what are the issues of women and others in the country. So now you have individual coming to the country and seeing what is going on. But it was still not enough. And why is that? Because some country would refuse to receive those experts coming to the country. So there are still some changes during the years, at a point that in 2006 there was an agreement with member states to review and revise now the Human Rights Council, the Human Rights Commission, and they translated it to the Human Rights Council, which now set up a very interesting tool that I know you're all reporting to. It's called the Universal Periodic Review, excuse me. And the irony is that the Universal Periodic Review, which we call UPR, was inspired by the African Review Peer Mechanism, APRM, right? Yes. So those are the mechanisms that exist when it comes to human rights. We also have those that are closer to home. I'm not going to go through them. They were mentioned by Mrs. Wilde-Giugis. I'm sorry if I misspelled your name. So above all the above mechanisms that I explained to you, meaning the treaty bodies, the conventions, and the UPR, as well as the special procedures, they provide what we call recommendations. So what are recommendations? When you submit a report to the treaty party, or when a special rapporteur comes and visits the country, they then make assessment of the situation on human rights, whether it's country or thematics. And the recommendation include what one can do, the gaps, the improvements that can be made, the setbacks, the individuals that could be appointed, such as, or entities such as the National Human Rights Commission. And then you have general comments, which also comes out. What are the general comments? I think it was briefly mentioned. It's an interpretation of international norms and standards that can be used as a reference to tailor them to the national context. Therefore, you can use those general comments to translate them into legislation in your own country. Or you can look at the blueprint and see what is the spirit behind, what are they trying to address, and translate it to your national context. Now, what do we do at the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights? We do a lot. Of course, we're heard only when there are crises in countries, but in some countries we did walk with them and try to assist them. So we provide technical assistance with a focus on either themes, it can be women's rights, children's rights, structure adjustment program, development, economic rights, business and human rights, and so on. We also focus on targets, can be women, parliament, children, people with disability, indigenous people, and so on. It can also be process. How do you report to the Universal Periodic Review, and so on and so forth. We do programming in country. That's where we have human rights advisors and other in country. And what we do is we listen to the victims across all borders and all walks of life. We design programs through discussions and brainstorming. We organize and plan in accordance to the need of the people, taking into consideration the national legal framework, the tools available in the country, and so on and so forth. We draft a plan of action, which we submit for consideration to your government and sometimes to some parliament or judges. We implement, meaning once we have that plan, we try to see how to move forward and change the lives of the people. And then we monitor and evaluate, meaning we look where have we made mistakes and how can we improve. And that, I think, is where we need you. We need you to help us also improve our work and monitor also our work. Today, under the umbrella of Vision 2030, inspired again by Agenda 2063, because it came right before Agenda 2030, we have embarked on another and new journey. But this time, we know better, and we hope that we are much stronger. Regarding women's rights and domestication now, one would be asking the questions, how can we work together? What are the UN's expectations? And how can we move further women's agenda? Let me first start by saying that we couldn't have achieved any of our work without the women and men on the African continent. From an international standpoint, domestication should be simple. It all depends on where the responsibility to translate international human rights law into national law stands or sits. But we have seen that it's also pretty complex. So let me attempt to unpack it a little bit. The states has 3 obligations. The first one is to respect. Okay? To respect means to refrain from interfering with the enjoyment of the right. Let's say that somebody's, a young woman, is being a victim of FGM. There is an interference to her right to health, to physical and mental integrity, including freedom from violence, right to life, her right to education, her right to not be subjected to torture or inhuman or degrading treatment. So meaning somebody is violating that right. So when we talk about respect to human rights, that means make sure nobody interferes to that right. The second obligation is to protect, which in a nutshell means to prevent others from interfering with the enjoyment of a right. Here, there should be more accountability. That's where most of the time the police, the judiciary, and others should come on board. And holding the perpetrator accountable. Also identifying substitution to, for example, FGM, and other related traditional practices affecting the health of women and children. There's a lady who once told me, why not find a transition from childhood to womanhood with songs and praise instead of tears and cries? Tradition is not static, it is dynamic, and it is true. Why not? Why can't we do that? It is possible. We might need to be a little bit more creative and think out of the box. The third now responsibility of the state is to fulfill. What does it mean? It's appropriate to make appropriate or set up appropriate measures towards full realization of the right. More tools, not only legislations, not only budgets, but also ownership. A shift in our mindset that if we put enough work into it, we will see change. New mechanisms, formal, informal settings, formal, informal settings within the national and cultural context that would follow up on progress and transfer knowledge and capacity to young girls, women, and men. When we talk about human rights violation, we mean either one of the 3 obligations is not respected, remember, to respect, to protect, and to fulfill, or all of them are completely ignored. So remember, it's just 3 responsibilities that we're focusing on. Honorable members, you are seated in a strategic position because you are much closer to the people we try to serve. You have the privilege of interacting with them, but mostly to listen to the victims of female genital mutilation, of traditional practices affecting the health of women and children. You have the privilege to know who are carrying on those practices, to understand the cultures behind, to identify the interventions in the country, whether it's legal, whether it's practice, whether it's cultural. You are in that seat where you can see it. You're also in a privileged position to see the consequences of those practices and more. That's a truly privilege. Now, this might seem a little bit redundant, as many have said their experiences. But as an African woman, I grew up admiring and listening to the tales of the wise men and women of our communities. Depending on which part of Africa you are from, the wise would either sit under a baobab tree, pass on a stick to allow the victim and alleged perpetrator to speak and express themselves, and provide to all the people a tailored solution. If we think at it, that is the role that you are playing, honorable members. Behind the scene, where there are no cameras, you are listening to your people, giving them the respect they deserve. You are identifying the gaps, why there are interferences in their rights, and you are providing solutions, setting up mechanisms to protect and fulfill the rights of the people. And also, you give advice through legislations, policies, and guidance. We would like to see more of it, especially the fulfill part. Women and girls need more mechanisms to implement, monitor female genital mutilation, traditional practices affecting women and children, and translate some of the international norms and standards into laws, guidance, new habits, new practice, and new standards tailored to your national context. I hope that I'll be around in 2063 to see our common vision come to fruit, Agenda 2063. But I truly hope that the blueprint that we are drafting, all of us, and the stepping stone we are putting in place will lead to a brighter and healthier future for our daughters, granddaughters, and granddaughters. Thank you for listening.
Merci beaucoup. Thank you, Jacqueline. Thank you for your presentation, which was very thought-provoking. You work for human rights, which are so important. Well, somebody mentioned it earlier. The problem here is that we do have a lot of instruments in place, but we are not able to take ownership of these instruments because you spoke about the important role to be played by parliamentarians. This is a recurrent issue, a recurrent concern which has been voiced. Indeed, parliamentarians do have an important role, particularly women parliamentarians, when we are talking about women's rights. You spoke about the 2030 agenda and its domestication, the important role of women, not only the role of women parliamentarians. As we always say, the women parliamentarians, of course, have an important role to play, but we can only succeed by working with the civil society, because the civil society does have a lot of possibilities of lobbying. I know that the law that we enacted for the representativeness of women, the civil society played a very important role in Mali to make sure that this law is enacted. Really needed their support. And that's the reason why we should insist on the fact that we need to work with the civil society. So I thank you for that. And you also spoke about the state's obligations, three obligations: respect, protection, and implementation. So the implementation depends on political will. And I think that this political will is lacking, and that's why we don't have proper implementation. We need an external pressure, and this pressure can only come from parliamentarians that we are. We should try and sensitize men. They are extremely sensitized. In this hall, we have a lot of men, if not, in fact, they're more in number than women. But we're not looking for their place, but we're rather wanting to work with them together. Thank you very much. And with that, I'll call on Mr. Ousmane Djibrila, who will talk about peace and security platform of the G5 Sahel countries. Thank you.
Merci à la...
Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I have traveled thousands of kilometers to come here, and the speeches that I've listened to today have made me forget how tired I was. And I was immediately very involved in this discussion, and I'm so pleased that the Pan-African Parliament is holding this conference today, and I really hope that I will be able to participate adequately to help you to defend a good cause. So may God bless us. In terms of the G5 Sahel countries, the G5 Sahel countries are a group of countries. They are 5 countries, and the 5 are Mali, Niger, Mauritania, Chad, and Burkina Faso. And these 5 countries decided to join together in order to fight against this phenomenon, what we are subject to today, terrorism, cross-border crime, and to fight against all forms of criminal activity. And it's not because we're in Kampala, Johannesburg, or Nairobi that we are not involved in these kinds of problems. We know that we are all faced by them. And so these 5 countries decided to work together against common enemies. And these 5 countries operate like 5 fingers on one hand. And as you know, one finger alone is not enough. But when the 5 are working together, the hand is effective. And today, these 5 countries are very similar in terms of their geography, their culture, and even from a geopolitical perspective. And one day there's an attack in Burkina Faso, the next day there's an attack in Mali. And these 5 countries in particular have an enormous concentration of attacks. And we share the same context. We are confronted by the same realities. And so we had to ask ourselves, what can we do to guarantee the right conditions for development in our countries? And we decided we had to work together. And with regards to women, we also understood that women had to play a very big role in this. And we realized that enormous efforts have been made already. There have been meetings of heads of states and governments in Mali, in Bamako, all over the region. Experts are meeting to discuss the issue. There are experts and the ministers who represent the G5 countries meet regularly to discuss these issues. And the women also of the G5 countries have been meeting to try to fight against what is happening in our countries. And this is so useful because the sharing of information and experiences is an important tool against fighting against terrorism and cross-border crime. And it's time for us to remember that if there's an alert that is given by France or the United States, Does that mean that we have no role to play? Our intelligence services also have a role to play. And if France says, be careful, do not go to this region or do not go to this country because it is dangerous. And France often is the country that alerts us, or America alerts us. But we should be the ones alerting each other. We shouldn't need to be informed by the exterior. And we are doing a lot. We are experiencing this thing on a day-to-day basis. We're not talking about theory here. This is practical reality, what we are experiencing every day. And I can tell you the things that we have seen in Mali, and our families are under attack every day. In 48 hours, there was an attack in Tongo Tongo in Niger. 30 soldiers died in this attack. And in less than 24 hours, there was another attack in Lapsanga, the border between Niger and Mali. Buses were attacked, buses leaving Bamako going to the north of the country. I have huge respect for you, but forgive me if I say that today we have an unacceptable situation where women are being raped along the road. And who are these women? They are our mothers, they are our sisters, they are our daughters. And there was another case recently in Bamako, and I actually had nieces who came to visit us, and I couldn't sleep until my nieces told me that they were safely home, because I know that on the road there are criminals who could attack them and who rape women. And so we have to recognize that there's an enormous problem. And in Gao, there was a problem. In Bwanza, there was a public rape that took place. And it was because they stopped a bus. They told the passengers to get out. They stole their property, their telephones, their money, etc. And afterwards, they raped the woman. And lately, it's true that we have had Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, the president of Mali, who has made enormous efforts to assist the G5 countries. But we still have problems. And we have problems of financing this group of countries, the initiative of the G5. But this G5 can't work without money. And for those who know the Sahel region, it is a very large region. And there are places in this region where you can drive for thousands of kilometers without even seeing a village. And it's desert. And so in order to keep those areas safe, it needs a lot of effort. And that is why the G5 countries have mobilized. And every time we have a meeting, I've even seen interviews with the presidents of the Women's Caucus for the Pan-African Parliament, talking to the media and saying to the media, you have an enormous role to play in what is going on in this region. And it's important for African media to play their role fully in terms of sensitizing the people. There's a lot of work that has to be done. And for the G5 countries, it's wonderful that African countries are taking their destiny in hand, and we cannot delegate this to other countries and other powers. We have to try to do more, and it's very important at this level. And it really hurts me when I hear that the American embassy has put out an alert, or the French have put out an alert for our region. It's for me, I would much rather want an alert coming from our own intelligence services. If it's an alert from another external source, then, you know, I go outside, and if I'm to die, then I will die. It's not for our outside intelligence services to tell us that. We need to be informed and informing each other. In my country, in my life, I know Bamako and Niger better than anybody else. Nobody's going to tell me that I shouldn't go here or I shouldn't go there because it's dangerous. But it has to be said that we have to do a lot of work. We have to work harder here. And another piece of information, each country of the G5 have decided to make a contribution and to request assistance from the European Union, for example. We're not going to refuse such assistance. But we need a comprehensive response to the problem. But whether it happens in Niger, in Mali, etc., we have to recognize that there are a lot of people who are without work, and we're talking about men and women, and who are not working are often the most vulnerable to these kinds of situations. There was recently, last week, I was listening on the radio station RFI. There were young women saying that they can't circulate freely. They can't move around freely. So we have to be there for them. And we have to focus on development strategies. And this in order to ensure that these youths find work. And as long as there's no local developments, we can have the best policies in the world, but if we are not focusing on local solutions, we're not going to get the results. And your role here is extremely important, because the decision makers have an important role to play. States must say that even if we are under pressure, we have to make decisions, and we have to make decisions that are going to be for the best for our people. Because it's the populations, it's our people that suffer. Because if you have a shop owner where people come and they break down his shop and steal his goods, afterwards he's got no source of income. And this can really upset people. And today we have youths in rural areas who get involved in these kinds of activities because the youth do not have work. And so we really need development policies, we need strategies to assist these youths who are unemployed. And as I said earlier, we need to come together and work synergetically. I've said that women have a very important role to play. And I say this to you directly, my sisters, you have a very important role to play, not just in peace and security in the Sahel region, but in Africa in general, because it's not just in Sahel that these things are happening. It just happens to be that the G5 are 5 countries that decided to work together, but there are attacks against women in Cameroon, in Nigeria, and in the terrorist attacks nowadays, of 5 attacks that may take place today involving different people, you will see that among them nowadays there are young girls who are participating in these terrorist activities. And so today we have an growing insecurity. People are being attacked, they are being robbed, and what is the most scary is the number of rapes and acts of violence committed against women every day. And we're all affected, either directly or indirectly. When we hear these kinds of things happening, even if it's far from you, we immediately feel personally involved because it's just wrong. I would like to thank the chairperson, and I would like to thank the parliamentarians. And before I finish, I would like to congratulate you on all the work that you are doing. I have had the opportunity today to listen to your speeches, and some of the speeches that I've heard have really encouraged me. I can see that there are people who are fully committed, who are doing amazing work. And we have heard speeches about women, young girls, and it's the same problem over and over again. It doesn't matter what theme we are covering, the basic problem is the same. And today in the Sahel region, we are calling on all of you to commit to the process, to show political will, and to change what is happening, to overcome what is happening. Because every time we have meetings in Bamako as the G5, we meet the chairperson of the Sahel Women's Parliament. She has meetings with the press, with the media. And I even saw her once drop her bag because she was so engaged in conversations with the media. So she is very passionate about what she does. And I have made these statements and this kind of speech at in other fora. And I would just like to ask that whatever actions you are taking, that you are committed, that you fight every day for this good cause, and may God bless you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Despite being very tired, you gave an excellent speech about what is going on in the Sahel. You spoke a lot about the intelligence services, and it's true that our security depends a lot on intelligence. And what we have seen today, not just in the Sahel, but in Africa in general, is the fact that we are often taken by surprise. And if we were better informed and we had the intelligence, we would be able to react better. You spoke about the women's platform, and yes, this platform exists for the G5 with its headquarters in Bamako. And there's a focal point for the G5 in Mali that does a lot of good work and speaks to the press, goes with the president everywhere to talk about these issues. And we have now begun talking on a parliamentary level in Chad. We created this network of women for the Sahel region. And we wanted to have discussions between the platform and the parliamentary network. And we wanted especially to include civil society because, as we've said before, civil society has an important role to play. He also spoke about the youth and youth unemployment, and there's no secret there. If people are unemployed, it makes them more vulnerable to becoming involved in this kind of thing. Education is incredibly important, sensitizing the public, educating our children. But it takes more than that. We need political will. We need decisions. And in terms of financial resources, the European Union has given a significant amount of money, 50 million euros, to the cause for the G5. And Mali has just purchased some helicopters for surveillance, and because we need technology to be able to fight these terrorists that are better and better equipped every day. And even the foreign countries like France and America who conduct operations in our areas, they even have problems to fight against the technology that is being used. But they are very active, and there are different groups fighting one group against the other group, and they fight and they kill each other in the middle of the city, and nobody does anything, even if the security forces are there. I think that the G5 is a very important organization. It should be extended to the rest of Africa so that we can work together. And their initiatives need to be applied elsewhere. And it started in the Sahel because the Sahel had some of the worst problems because of Libya being destabilized and Libya sharing a border with Algeria and Mali, etc. And so, once again, I would just like to encourage all those who are complaining against Sarkozy and what was done, because, when it's Sarkozy or Bush, President Bush, we say nothing. But it's a result of their actions. I really think that we need to continue raising our voices, and we need to sign petitions so that these people understand that we will never, no longer accept external interference into our affairs in our countries. I'm sorry, it's something that I'm very passionate about, so I had to say something about it. But we are now going to take a break. But before the break, I would just like to give the floor to our clerk to make a few announcements. We're going to start again at 14:30, and then we are going to have the debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Cisse and Your Excellency, Madam Second Vice President. I have one announcement, and the announcement is that there is a meeting on Friday from 2:30 to 5 o'clock. This meeting is a joint Food and Agriculture Organization and Pan-African Parliament dialogue on the Technical Cooperation Program Agreement, also known as the TCP. And the following are reminded to be present at that meeting on Friday from 2:30, Friday the 13th of October. Bureau and executive members of the Pan-African Parliament Alliance on Food Security and Nutrition, members of the Committee on Rural Economy, Agriculture, Natural Resources and Environment, the delegation from Benin, the delegation from Burkina Faso, the delegation from Cameroon, the delegation from Madagascar, and the delegation from Uganda. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator.
Merci,
Thank you very much, Mr. Clark. The session is ended. Thank you.